Hello, everyone. We're drinking bubbles tonight. It's Wednesday. It's the week before Thanksgiving. It's the holidays, so why not? It's weekly wine picks, and I am so excited to be talking about two really, really incredible sparkling wines that are under $35. One of which is actually champagne, which, as I'm sure you all know by this point, kind of an impossible situation to find champagne under 50 bucks, let alone 35 or under. But I assure you, this is not just two sparkling wines that are like meh, under $35. These are actually really, really high quality, well made sparkling wines made in the champagne method. And I think you're going to be pretty excited about them. So I think I'll kick this off with just a little refresher, since so many of you are going to be opening sparkling wine this holiday season, with just a quick reminder, how do we do this properly? Now, I know so many of you love to savor champagne. I love to savor champagne too, but may I remind you of all of the possible scenarios that can end in really terrible situations in which you end up in the hospital. So may I just remind you that being in the hospital is not a fun thing to do in the holidays, let alone during a pandemic. So I'm going to encourage you to do it the proper way. So you'll just remove, this is probably not the best wine to do this with. I should probably do the champagne. But anyway, you're going to remove that little seal on top. You see this little key right here. You're going to flip that up. You're going to twist it, usually about 4 to 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Push, pull, and you're always going to keep your hand on top of the bottle and the cork. Do not let it go. Do not just randomly like throw your hand around, and certainly do not push pointed towards anyone that you don't really that you really like. If you don't really like them, maybe don't point it there either, but think about it. From there, you're going to lift up the bottle, and you're going to twist in the bottom, and you're going to hold on to this. You want to make sure this is nice and cold. The colder the champagne or the sparkling is going to be, the easier this is going to be for you. Warm champagne loves to explode a little faster and a little harder, and can also result in premature I don't know what you would call that. Actually, I do know. I'm just not going to say it on camera. All right, so twist from the bottom, holding on to the top, and you'll feel it start to loosen. Hold on to it real, real tight. You can see right now the cork is already starting to come up. And just when you feel like it's starting to give way, you're going to stop and just gently release. There you go. Don't get scared. And that is how you do it. So we're going to start with the Kush, the Armenian sparkling wine. Who here has had wine from Armenia? Raise your hand. No one? Bueller? Yeah, me neither. This is actually a sort of I shouldn't call it an up-and-coming wine region. That's actually been around for a very, very long time. And actually, my Armenian friends would be horrified to hear me call this an up-and-coming region. But I will say, for the United States, this is a region that we don't see a lot of wines come out of. I think for a couple of reasons. One, it's tiny. There's not a ton of wine production here, but they have been making wine for quite some time. The other reason is, these grapes are not easy to say. It's not an easy region to study. Let me just move this screen down here so you can see what there we go. Now you know what I'm drinking. These are both, though they are not both champagne, and as we remember, champagne can only be made in the region of Champagne. Otherwise, it's called sparkling wine. And then from there, you have different terminology to assign to specific regions. I.e., if it's from Italy and it's made the Champagne method with all the regulations, it might be called Franciacorta. If it's in Spain, it might be called a cava. If it's in France but not in Champagne, and maybe it's from, I don't know, Burgundy, it might be called Cremant Bourgogne. And of course, there's different regulations that make it so that you could only call it that specific term if it's made in the way that that region has specified. So because this is not from Champagne, and because this is from Armenia, this is just simply Armenian sparkling wine. The producer is called Kush, though it is made in the Champagne method. What does that mean? Well, that means that it has been, the secondary fermentation is happening inside the bottle. So unlike, other wines, other sparkling wines like Prosecco, where it's made in the tank, it's called the Charmat method. Everything lid comes on top. They put a little bit of CO2 in there, and then voila, you got sparkling wine. This is made secondary fermentation in the bottle, meaning after this wine, the still wine is made, there is a combination of liquid that goes in there to ensure that fermentation happens again. It's captured on the very top, and that secondary fermentation produces carbon dioxide, and that is how we get all of the bubbles inside the bottle. And so that little the little thing they add is usually it's a combination of yeast and sugar, and that kind of restarts everything. And then after that's done, they remove the cap. They usually add a little bit more since you lose a little bit when you disgorge it. Generally, that has a tiny bit of sugar to kind of, move things up a decibel a bit, especially in champagne. Anyway, I digress. This is 2 grapes from Armenia that I cannot pronounce, so I'm going to spell them for you. Are you ready for that? I'll try to pronounce them. They are Voskyat, Voskehat, and that is 60% Voskyat. And I hope that I have some Armenian friends who are watching this video who can help me with pronunciation. And I'm very sorry for butchering that. The other grape is Katuni, so Khatouni. That is what we refer to, or I guess the Armenians refer to as the Armenian version of Chardonnay. So of course, champagne is always going to be made from 1 or all of 3 grapes, 1, 2, or 3 grapes. My God, I can't talk tonight. That is going to be Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. So of course, we want something that's a little bit more Chardonnay, like in our Armenian Sparkling. Let's get into the wine, and let me tell you a little bit about it. So here, this wine is made from those 2 grapes. The vineyards are at 1,750 meters of elevation, which is kind of wild. Crazy, crazy high, rocky volcanic soils made from these 2 grapes. And it is a whopping $22. Yes, I can't believe it either. I was actually introduced to this wine a couple of years ago by a friend of mine who works at a small local wine shop in St. Helena. And she introduced it to my colleague, Jilly, and Jilly was like, you have to try this Armenian Sparkling. And I was like, no, I'm all set. And she was like, no, seriously, it's really good. And I tasted it and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And so you'll see every now and then a few other people sort of get on board and get excited about this wine. And for good reason. Jeb Dunnick gave it a 91, which for a $22 Sparkling was a pretty amazing score. Raved about its quality and how delicious it was. And I have to say, I agree. So what can you expect from this? Well, on the nose already, you're getting lots of apples and pears, all of those great orchard fruits. And it's really sort of that chalky smell. So if I were just to smell this sparkling wine and I had no idea what this was and I didn't know where it came from, I would tell you that I was definitely in the old world based on what I'm getting on this nose. And that is because a lot of the flavors and the aromas that I'm getting are quite savory. They're definitely more on the less ripe side versus the more ripe side. So sort of that chalkiness, maybe a little bit of biscuit, but not a lot. And then those great sort of perfectly plucked apples and pears. And that's kind of it in a good way. Really clean, really pure, really expressive, but to the point, focused. I don't love when, I stick my nose in like a cheap sparkling and like all you get's like kind of sweet or syrupy. It doesn't smell so great. I love that this is just clean and pure and bright. Tiny, tiny, little tiny bubbles. And it is so, oh my gosh, it just kind of, it hits, it bounces, it gives breath, and then it cleans up after itself. It is so unbelievable that you can have a sparkling wine of this quality for $22. It kind of blows my mind. What else do you need to know? Actually, I think my chat may be turned off. So if you let me know if you can chat with me tonight. For some reason, because I have, I talk about wine, so I can't have kids on this. For some reason, it told me that people can't chat with me. I don't know why. Let's taste this wine one more time. Am I kidding? That will not be just one more time. Wow. All of those great apples and pears. And what I love is that chalkiness, that sort of minerality that I was getting on the nose, I'm continuing to get on the palate. It's got breadth, it's got depth, it's got texture. So a lot of times, let me back up for a second and just talk about why I think this is important, why I think this particular sparkling wine sits leaps above, light years above other sparkling wines at this price. Normally at this price, you're talking about either Prosecco or you're talking about like a cheap sparkling. And what makes them cheap is obviously the quality of the grapes. These are very, very high quality, hand selected parcels of grapes, but then also aromatically, it tends to be a little bit more ripe. It tends to be almost, sometimes you get like a plasticky smell in them. And then on the palate, I just find it to not have quite enough acidity. It's not as balanced as I want it to be. And then either, you're dealing with a cheap sparkling that is really, really dry and doesn't have a ton of flavor or texture, or on the other side of the spectrum, you're dealing with a sparkling wine that's, opulent and rich and maybe a little bit cloying and doesn't have the acidity or the backbone or the structure. This has everything. This to me tastes like a really, really good $45 to $55 champagne. So, something that you would find that would have all the great qualities of like a Moet or a Veuve. Definitely not as sweet as Veuve, but has the pedigree, I guess, or the all the qualities that we love of a higher caliber champagne, but at literally a fraction of the price. So, oh, good, the chat is working. Thank you guys for commenting. I can't see it though. Okay. Hello, guys. Nice to see you. Yes, who doesn't love bubbles? We all love bubbles. Bubbles are the best, and we're going to be drinking a lot this season. Let me just point out the alcohol in this, which is 12%. So super low. I don't think the champagne we're going to be having later is any different. Nope, it is all going to be 12%. And you know what? I'm going to set this aside and get into it because I know everybody's busy. It's the holidays. We have a lot of drinking to do and maybe a lot of cooking to do. I don't know. This wine, I have to tell you, I discovered this obviously these are both Wine Access wines. This is actually a Wine Access exclusive. Now it's, I've talked about Wine Access exclusives before, wines like the Radio Silence and the Yesterday that are NBA wines, those private label wines. This is not one of them. This is, it's an exclusive, meaning this wine is exclusively available at their import it into the United States. And on top of that, they have a custom disgorgement. So let me once again back up. So the story goes like this. So head of wine and master of wine, my friend Vanessa Conlon, she's also my host. She was over in Champagne with the CEO of Wine. They were cruising around, going to all the great, wonderful like, Bollinger and Krug and Dom and Bill Carr and all the places that we can only dream of going. And so they're going around and they're asking everyone, where should we know about? What are the houses or the growers that, nobody's talking about that, that haven't broken, but you guys know about? What's the insider secret? And everyone kept talking about this grower, Perignon, M. Perignon. And so they were like, all right, well, we have a little extra time. Let me just go knock on their door. So they literally roll up to Perignon, which is just a house. It's not, big fancy estate or chateau. They roll up, they knock on the door, and they introduce themselves, say, hey, we sell wine in the United States. Any chance we can taste? And they're like, all right, I guess. So they go in, they literally sit at the kitchen table and they're talking about the wine and like, this is amazing. And so this grower, and so I'll sort of explain what the situation is in Champagne if you don't know. So there's, many different ways that one could acquire grapes or make champagne in Champagne. When we say house champagne, we're talking about a house. So like Dom Perignon or Krug or Bollinger, any of the ones that I've just mentioned. A lot of those houses, some of them own their own fruit, but a lot of those houses will actually purchase fruit from growers around Champagne. And that's the way it was for many, many years, hundreds of years. It was only recently, within the last 2 to 3 decades, that we started seeing this movement called the grower champagne movement. You've heard of it called farmer fizz before. And this basically is the growers that were supplying these big houses. They decided to make a little of their own wine. A lot of times those houses were already making their own champagne. They just decided, it would never leave France, or, people just weren't excited about it. They wanted the big fancy names. They weren't, nobody was excited about buying grower champagne. But in the last few years, it's really exploded. And so a lot of sommeliers and wine connoisseurs, and certainly champagne connoisseurs, have sort of latched on to this movement, this grower champagne movement, myself included, because they're a little bit different. So a house style can often be a style. So a wine that's made consistently year after year after year. A grower style, typically is more indicative of the terroir, which is, sort of generally why we prefer grower champagnes maybe to house champagnes. We still love house champagnes, of course. Give me a bottle of Krug, give me a bottle of Dom any day, and we will certainly be talking about those. But this is a grower that has been supplying these houses for many, many years, that makes their own champagne in teeny tiny quantities. And after that sort of impromptu meeting that they had in Champagne, they were like, this is amazing. We want to take all of it for the United States. What do you think? And they were like, okay. And they're like, also one more thing. And they were like, what? And they said, can we do a custom disgorgement? So the champagne, like I said before, after the secondary fermentation happens and you've got your bubbles and you sort of let it sit on the yeast and it does its thing. And at that point, it's a crown cap on there. So like, it's literally like, if you've ever seen a crown cap on like a bottle of Coca-Cola, same sort of situation. So they click that crown cap off, a little wine is expelled, and then they add the dosage, which is a combination of wine and sugar. And that is for a number of different reasons, but that can be anywhere from 0 grams per liter all the way up to, if you had a demi-sec, you could have it as high as 20 grams per liter. Normally for it to be called brut, you're going up to about 8 grams per liter. You see it in that sweet spot of between 4 and 8. The original Brugnon that they tasted was a little higher. It was closer to 8. And so knowing that the clientele for Wine Access typically likes a drier style, they asked them to bring it back down to 6 grams per liter. And so not only do you have a wine that is exclusively Wine Access's, it's also a custom disgorged bottle of champagne, which is pretty cool. And this is coming in at $35, if you can believe it. This is a wine that actually is going to be featured on the podcast that comes out tomorrow, featuring Baxter Holmes. He's the senior staff writer for NBA, but for ESPN, excuse me. But he actually was famous because he was the one that wrote the very big article that broke the story about the NBA players drinking all the wine. And Baxter's wonderful, and I love him so much. He's a friend. But he is a champagne lover and drinks amazing champagne. And so we decided to surprise him with this little $35 champagne, and he loved it. I think he ended up buying like half a case after. So yeah, I have not mentioned, this is all coming from Écueil, which it says in the front of the label here, and then the Premier Cru of the Montagne de Reims. This is 60%, actually it's different on here, I'm sorry, 65% Chardonnay and 35% Pinot Noir. And I think I've told you everything technically that you need to know about this. Oh, good. I'm just reading your comments. I'm sorry. Oh, good. All right. Well, I'm glad that you're enjoying wine of all forms. I just swirled this champagne, which is not necessary. Oh, you're probably wondering about my glasses. I haven't even talked about that yet. Yes. So sparkling wine, I prefer in a wine glass. Many of you probably do as well. I love a good flute for a good toast and celebration. The problem with the flute, of course, is that you can't actually smell it. So I don't know if you've ever actually tried to like stick your nose. I don't know how big your nose is, but sticking your nose in that tiny, tiny little hole in a champagne flute, not so easy. So I love, and a lot of people who enjoy sparkling wine love champagne in a white wine glass, or even a Bordeaux glass. Michel Roland, who I used to take care of quite often at Press, I used to love, he loved like these huge glasses for champagne. Anytime he'd come in and he'd order a bottle of champagne, I would set down like the biggest glasses we had for him, and he just loved it. So I like it in this glass. These are not my fancy glasses, I admit. These are from Target. And hopefully I will have some of my Mark Thomas glasses soon. I just need to order some more at this place here. But anyway, I prefer it because it allows me to smell the wine. It also sort of like softens the bubbles a little bit. I find sometimes the bubbly can be a little too bubbly. And so I like to soften that just a little bit. And I love to enjoy all the textural components of the wine. So, if you love brioche and you love toasted everything, this is your wine. It's so toasty and appley and brioche-y. It's not sweet, but it's got that sort of like yeasty, bready, not Brett-y, but bread, like baked bread, buttery and sort of appley nose. So The Kush, by comparison, a little brighter, tart, more appley, more of that orchard fruit, more pure. This is broad and it's brooding. It actually feels perfect for this night. It was super, super cold here today. It was like down in the 30s. I know for some of you that's like nothing, but listen, as California girl, I'm trying to adjust out here. I'm on the East Coast at the moment and it is cold. So just take note. Yum. I just love this champagne so much. It delivers every time. It gives you everything you want from a great champagne. Honestly, it totally drinks like a champagne that is 3 times, 4 times the price of a $35 champagne. If I had seen this on the shelf and I was like, $35 is not going to be good, my mind would be blown if I didn't know anything about that. And even knowing the pedigree of where this fruit goes, and the legacy of this family in Champagne, I'm still always impressed every time I open a bottle of Brignon. It's just kind of mind blowing that they were able to bring this wine in for this price. And I think, I know that when you can score deals like this, it is mostly because they are sort of cutting out the middleman. So it's a lot more direct to consumers. So literally buying it from the champagne house, bringing it over and selling it direct. So there's normally about 2 to 3 layers between more layers between the champagne house at minimum to your doorstep, which means the price goes up and up and up and up and up. You've eliminated 2 to 3 by doing it direct the way they have, which is why the champagne can come in at $35. Also, grower champagnes tend to be a little less expensive. There are, of course, many exceptions, but they do tend to be a little less expensive than the house champagnes. Again, sort of why we love drinking grower champagnes, because it's often indicative of quality. So I have to say, if you're someone that loves that Dom Krug style, something that's got a little bit more oak, got a little bit more breath, has that golden apple-y, sort of tart fruit profile, great lift, great acidity, but, really anchored by texture and by, that nice toasty brioche thing going on. This is a champagne that will knock your socks up. I have to say, I buy this, in quantity for the holidays, actually for all the time, because it is so, so good. And I can bring it to almost any party. And it is wonderful. And it's a great holiday gift. It's a great wine to have around, and definitely the one that you want to sort of stock up on. Kevin, can sparkling wine get corked? It's a good question. It can. It's a lot more rare for sparkling wine to be corked. And someone had told me that because the corks are more expensive, that they tend to not be, they tend to be less corked. It doesn't mean it can't happen, but yes, I have had plenty of corked champagne for sure. And it sucks because, that is like the most disappointing thing when you wrestled a cork off of a bottle of champagne and you find that it smells like grandma's basement and you're like, eek, gross. Hello, new subscriber. Welcome to Weekly Wine Picks. I'll talk about what we're doing here. So this series, if you don't know what it is, I do this series every week. I took last week off. I picked 2 wines that are usually thematic. So this week is all about bubbles, and they can be found on Wine Access. So I apologize in advance if you are not living in the United States. Some of these wines will be more challenging to find, specifically this Perignon. So I'm very sorry. This is only available in the United States, or if you're in France, you might be able to find it there. But here in the US, this is Wine Access exclusive. So I specifically source these wines from Wine Access because they ship nationwide. They have a provenance guarantee. So if you don't like the wine, it's on them. And then on top of that, they're often sourcing directly, which means, again, less and less middlemen. So you're generally getting a better price. And then you're also just guaranteeing quality because it's not sitting in 3 warehouses before it actually gets to your doorstep. And then they ship with all their cold packs. And again, thinking back to other people and other businesses that I purchased wine from, I can't tell you how many times my wine has arrived and it has been damaged or they didn't cold ship it. And so the cork's pushing up. It's just a nightmare. And, then you have to get on the phone and argue with someone about, why this is their fault, not yours. Wine Access, you don't have any of those things. And so for me, personally, it's wonderful, but also as I'm recommending it to you guys, it's incredibly important that I'm recommending something that I know with confidence that is going to be great and they're going to make it right in case anything goes wrong. And that means more to me than anything. And they're just wonderful. They always have, the best wines, and I call them like the Nordstrom of wine shopping, because it's really well curated. They always have the best stuff, all different price points, and you can always, lean on them and trust them for everything. So, let's see. Is there a traditional Thanksgiving dish you would pair with bubbles? D, all of the above. Bubbles is like the best for Thanksgiving, especially if you love bubbles. There is absolutely no reason to have any other wine at Thanksgiving dinner besides champagne. I will say that not everyone does, and not everyone feels the way that I feel. But honestly, champagne and sparkling wine is one of the most versatile food pairing wines out there. And you'd be hard pressed to find a better Thanksgiving Day pairing than that. Of course, like my dad is not going to drink champagne all throughout dinner, nor is my brother-in-law, nor is my sister for that matter. So I'm kind of cheese stands alone. So I have lots of different wines, all sort of like easygoing wines at multiple different price points that I always, just so you guys know, I always serve in a tumbler. I do not break out the stems on Thanksgiving Day. I do not recommend it. There's too much going on. Of course, if you've got a smaller Thanksgiving going this year, by all means do your thing, grab the stems, and it's 2 to 4 of you, that's fine. But I just find that when there's so many things on the table and people are grabbing things and reaching for things, and there's a lot of things going on, that this can be a really, really disastrous situation on the table. So grab the tumblers, whether that is a stemless wine tumbler, or whether that's a like a French wine tumbler or Italian wine tumbler, they're great. Yes, Toby, can you buy this wine from ABC Wine and Spirits? ABC is what? That's like the what is that? The Maryland, DC, Virginia spirit shops, right? I guess the short answer is no. This is the Brugnon is a Wine Access exclusive. The Kush you actually might be able to. I have seen this at other wine shops. So ABC may have this. So you can find the link to it below in the description. So just Google it and see if you can find it if you don't want to buy it from Wine Access. If you're in need of that. You make your own wines, huh? That's pretty cool. I love that. Thanksgiving Day wine pairings. If you're interested, an article literally just came out right before this on Departures, and I list all of my Thanksgiving Day wine recommendations for each different dish. So you can check that out on Departures, I think departures.com. If you just want to Google it, it's right there. I'm going to go back to this Kush for just a quick moment, because why not? Oh, it's getting more floral. I like the bubbles. Oh, hello. Don't do what I just did. CO2 will be emitted and you will do all this nonsense. I like the bubbles in this wine. They are a little softer and a little bit more fine. And if you're someone that doesn't love, big chunky bubbles, this is really soft. I will say it becomes more like a still wine faster than the champagne. Like I don't think it holds its bubbles quite as long, but it's okay. I think this is a wine that you're probably going to want to serve in a champagne flute to hold all of those bubbles in there. I think a white wine glass is not really. It's really delicious if you love this wine as a still wine, but I think it's gone flat a little too fast. It's still lovely and still delicious. Yum. Really floral now. Wow. Very interesting. This, however, is like getting more intensely brioche. Yum. Still, that tartness, champagne, super cold. Chalk everywhere. Everything's aged in caves. I mean, you think of champagne, it's like a miracle that they could even make wine there because it is so darn cold up there. And how they get those grapes, even to a ripeness where they can make it into champagne is always sort of a situation every year. But what I will say is, because it is so cold and because those grapes never really get to a ripeness that they would in, say, Burgundy or even California for that matter, because of that, it means that there's a lot more acidity, which is what you want in champagne. Champagne, because it's going through that secondary fermentation process, because it's having sugar added at the end, you want acidity, you want a little less sweetness in the grapes to begin with. That way you can build it up later. So at a baseline, you're going to want a more tart, acidic wine. If you've ever tasted a vin clair, or vin clair if you're French, you'll know that, those wines, the still base wines, vin clair means base wine. It doesn't mean base wine, but it is the base wine of a champagne. Vin Clair, a base wine of a champagne, is incredibly acidic and tart. It like will tear the enamel off of your teeth. And it, it to some degree is like not really a wine that I'd even want to drink, on a desert island. If it was the last thing I had. I mean, they can be really, really sort of unpleasant. Some are delicious, but some are not. And so I just wanted to kind of mention that. Kevin, what are your thoughts on decanting sparkling wine? Thank you so much for asking. For really good champagne, I love decanting sparkling wine. In fact, I was just talking about that in a podcast. I don't know if you listened to that, and that's why you asked the question, but I was on a podcast recently. It's called the Black Wine Guy Experience. And I was talking about how that it was sort of my first entree into the wine world. I had a sommelier mentor who was pairing scallops. He was eating scallops for lunch, and he said, pair this dish for me. And I said, okay. So I went and I grabbed champagne because, I'd always heard champagne goes with everything. So you can't go wrong with that, right? So I brought the champagne out. It was a Paul Roger, I think. That's a lie. Was it a Paul Roger? No, I just was talking about this. Anyway, I brought it out and he tasted it. He was like, that's delicious. And then he decanted it. And I was like, what are you doing? And he said, really, really great high quality champagne. If you decant it and remove some of those bubbles, like sort of like I was talking about before with the glass, if you remove those, if you decant it, the bubbles will sort of dissipate. And what you're left with is a much more aromatic, pleasant, textured, still-ish wine with, great vibrancy and acidity. So not all of the bubbles get removed, but when you're dealing with a dish like scallops that has a lot of sweetness and intensity and texture, and you want something a little bit more broad to pair with it, the decanting of that champagne sort of loosens it up and puts a little more muscle behind it. And so decanting can be really, really an effective strategy if you are dealing with a dish that needs a little bit more muscle. You can decant a great champagne. Would I decant this? No. This champagne, while wonderful, is not, I think, a champagne that I think needs decanting or wants decanting. I just don't think it merits it. It's delicious as is. And at the end of the day, I mean, this is a great quality champagne, but it is a $35 champagne. So I only recommend decanting sparkling wine if it's, maybe $100 or above. And even then, like I find Dom Perignon is probably not a great champagne to decant because I do find those bubbles are so tiny and they do dissipate so quickly. There's really no need for it. It was it's Nicolas Foyat, the Tête Cuvée, and I'm totally blanking on it, even though I just was talking about this podcast. Anyway, it was not the Paul Roger. The Palme d'Or, the one with the crazy little textured bottle. That's the champagne that it was. And it was a vintage Palme d'Or champagne that he decanted, not a huge wide decanter, just enough to give it a little bit of space. It was delicious and it was sort of mind blowing. And it was like one of the things that I was like, wow, I know absolutely nothing about wine and I have so much to learn and I probably will never get there. And that is true. And now here we are, like 7 years later. It was a great question. I never even would have thought to bring it up while I was talking about it. So thank you so much for asking it. Same with white wines. I know we've talked about that, or I've talked about that before. White wines can and sometimes should be decanted, especially if they're super, super young. I think, a lot of times we think of decanting only for red wines, but if you've got a white wine, especially if it's like just been bottled, or if it's young and it feels really tight, white wines can be tight too. You can decant those and sort of loosen them up and get them a little bit more aired out. Oxygen does a lot for a white wine. It loves to be like fleshed out. If you want that acidity and that tightness to remain, don't decant it. But I find, a lot of times, especially like Ribolla Gialla, can be a really, really tight knit grape that wants a little bit more space. It loves oxygen. It's a wine that oxygenates quickly. So you'll notice the color of that grape actually turns, to that sort of golden hue very quickly. That's a grape that loves decanting. Chardonnay can certainly be decanted. Sauvignon Blanc generally doesn't need decanting. But again, if you have a white wine and you're just like, wow, it's just like really tight, like everything seems like sort of closeted and masked and muted, go ahead and decant it. Whites are totally fine to be decanted. So don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I've done it a number of times. I would definitely not do the same for Prosecco. Prosecco, because it is not going through the same method of second, Hello. Same method that champagne goes through. So the Prosecco goes through what's called the Charmat method, which means they're sort of adding CO2 to that wine. The intent there is more celebratory. So Prosecco, while there's some really, really wonderful examples of it, Prosecco is meant to be drunk sparkling. It is intent. It isn't. It's not a wine that is made as a base wine first to be anything other than a sparkling wine. And so we don't decant Prosecco for that reason. It's sort of celebratory and it's fun, and it's delicious and it's bubbly, and that's the intent. The reason we would decant a champagne is because underneath that champagne, a lot of times, and underneath those bubbles, is a really gorgeous still wine. And while, I'm sure underneath Prosecco, there's some gorgeous still wines as well, it's just not always the case. And you don't generally find Proseccos above, $25, $30 that really warrant such a thing. I think that is all I have to say, because I have dinner and it's 8 o'clock and I don't want to keep you guys any longer. So once again, the two sparkling wines that we talked about tonight were the Kush from Armenia and the M. Brugnon. These are both, I think this is non-vintage. I should have double checked that. I believe this is non-vintage. Non-vintage champagne, or multi-vintage as we're sort of calling them now. These are both available on Wine Access, and you can find the link below. And I will see you all next week for our next episode. I do believe we are heading to Chardonnay land. That is what is on the docket, and I don't expect any changes before then. So I'll see you all then. Thank you much for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your week. Bye.